You're listening to The Watchers, a show where two women from opposite ends of New Jersey watch TV and movies about how much we just really hate women in this country. So much. So much.
I had a really different time watching this movie.
Yeah, you and me both.
Kind of almost a better time, actually. I really like this movie. I always have, but it was so interesting to watch. I haven't seen it in a long time. And it's so interesting to watch it as a 39-year-old versus the last time I saw it when I was probably like in my early 20s.
Yeah. Speaking of you and myself, the person on this microphone, I'm Jodie.
Oh, yeah, I'm Andrea.
And we watched Election.
We did watch Election.
Wow. What a different experience. Thank God this isn't one of the movies that I think I watched and didn't. I did watch this movie. It's just been almost 20 years probably since I've seen it.
Yeah, I watched it a lot. It was one of my friend group. It was one of our movies we would put on all the time when I was from probably 18 to 22. Probably Mean Girls probably took over, but we watched Election a long time ago. And I really liked it then. I liked it this time too, just different.
So did I. Yeah, I had forgotten about all of the stylistic stuff, which was really fun to revisit because it's so unusual. All the different camera tricks and all of the different fun angles and switching to wide angle lenses randomly and all of that stuff and the strange transitions. And I really enjoyed seeing that again because I'd forgotten about it.
Yeah, I love a movie that feels really thoughtful and intentional about what it's doing and is also clearly having fun with those choices.
Yeah, absolutely.
The sound design too is really similar in that way, or there'll be a weird little sound effect or really fun.
Yeah, no, I'm really glad we got to revisit this. I remembered liking it, but when we decided to do it this week, I was kind of okay. I wasn't it wasn't one of the ones that I was I can't wait to watch this again. I was just I remember liking it. But I feel like I got a lot of things to think about out of my rewatch. It was super interesting. So this film was 1999, directed by Alexander Payne. This was his second movie ever, which is amazing in how confident it feels.
Totally, yeah.
You know? The one before this was Citizen Ruth, which, have you seen that movie?
I haven't seen it, and this made me want to see it.
I know. Yeah. I feel like I might have. When I read the description of it, it was Laura Dern. I feel like I remember Laura Dern in that role, but it might have just been because I saw it somewhere. I don't trust myself at all anymore. If this podcast has taught me anything, it's that my memory is less reliable than I actually thought it was. After that, he did About Schmidt, Sideways, The Descendants, which famously in my life is a movie that I watched after my dad passed away and no one told me that it was about a dad.
Perfect. Yeah. Awesome. Really good.
Then my dad passed away in 2011 and I watched this movie very shortly afterwards and was like, why didn't anyone tell me this? This was the movie where I was like, okay, there's got to be a list out there. It's like the does the dog die list, right? Is there a dead dad?
Is this a dad movie?
Yeah. And then Nebraska in 2013. The screenplay was by him and Jim Taylor, who's his writing partner, based on Tom Perrotta.
Yeah.
His 1998 novel.
Did you read about the sort of publishing story with this?
Oh, the publishing story? No, I read about the two things that he kind of had in mind when writing it. I read an anecdote about him and a Bruce Springsteen concert because this is our Jersey connection.
Big time Jersey connection. The book is set in Jersey, and they moved it for filming. Yeah, which is funny because Tracy. It's funny to think about Tracy with a North Jersey accent versus this Midwestern one that she's doing. So Perrotta sold the rights to the book for the movie before the book was published. So he was working with the studio and they asked him for a specific script and he, for whatever reason, passed on that. But he said I have this book that might be interesting for you guys. So that's why last week I said wow, that was really close together, that the movie and the book. And that's why, because the book hadn't been published yet and the movie being sold is what then drew interest in the book being published. So they really did kind of go hand in hand.
That's so interesting. I feel like one of the things I read about him, like we just said, he's from Jersey. He grew up in Newark. And for those of you that don't know, Newark, New Jersey, and especially the time he grew up, it was not a wealthy place, let's just say. And so in an interview with him I read in The Guardian, he talks about like some of his decisions around, you know, quote unquote selling out, or not selling out, but like the idea of selling his work to Hollywood versus like being this, you know, he went to Yale, but he went to Yale as like a scholarship kid from Newark, you know, and he was like, yeah, but then I got to just have enough money to sit and write for a while. Like, so of course, you know, makes a lot of sense.
It's so clear if you've read, so we covered The Leftovers. I know you watched the whole...
I watched the whole show.
Yeah. But that's also based on a Prada novel. And then I've read a few of his, Little Children and a few others, and they're all so interested in, like, class, but especially the middle class. Most of them kind of focus on that, like, suburban middle class people who have to, like, work for a living. And
it honestly made me want to read this book, the original, like, the book that this is based on, because I feel like when I read about the differences between the book and the movie, like, I think he's happy with this film and all from all reports, and I loved the movie, but I also think there's stuff that was left out just for time that was super interesting. And one of the things I kind of noted this time versus the first time I saw it was the undercurrent of class difference. Like, it's not the top line at all, but the fact that, you know, Tracy is constantly talking about, like, because you don't notice, I didn't notice it at first because she's talking about everybody. She's talking about the burnouts and these different groups of people, but she comes from she would be a scholarship kid.
Totally.
Right? And she's talking about all these people with their, like, you know, dad bought him a truck and I'm on the bus kind of thing.
And how dare she have ambition and be so concerned.
God, we hate women.
Well, and it's funny because Chris Klein...
We hate women that want anything.
Exactly. Yeah. And Chris Klein, the golden retriever in this movie, who comes from privilege and has never had anything bad happen to him, and he's kind of the sweet one. And when I was younger, I loved Tracy, but I thought of her as a villain. I thought she was like a really fun kind of... I mean, Matthew Broderick, too. I knew at the time. I knew they were both sort of despicable. Yeah. Or I felt like they were both despicable back then. And I feel so differently watching it now. But it is like...
There was a review from the time that called her a baby Hitler.
It's so...
Andrea.
It's so wild. And it's funny, too, because, like, in the way that what's different about this movie from Mean Girls, the way I think we're going to talk about it, is I think the movie knows better.
I agree.
I think it's more subtle than maybe viewers, especially at the time, before the Hillary of it all and all the think pieces were kind of ready for.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I do think the movie knows better. I think that Alexander Payne did this really interesting thing with this film because it is the late 90s where it, like... It doesn't really tell you either way who the one bad guy is. Right. It's kind of like everybody is bad, but like make up your own mind. There were so many articles that I read that talked about our changing take on it. But there was one interview on NPR with between Scott Detrow and I think Constance Grady, who wrote about like purity culture a lot and also like the way we looked at girls and women in the 90s. And the very end of this article, she says, you know, the movie is so rich and interesting that almost all of it holds up, except for the way that we used to talk about it. And Scott Detrow says, so we're the problem, not the movie? And she says, yeah, we really were the problem with it.
I think that's exactly right.
That's the thesis statement I have for this whole episode. Yeah,
it's so funny. I really kind of... I don't like how we talked about it at the time, but I think it's just so fascinating. I don't know that this sort of conversation happens with many movies.
We should, before we get into the like analysis part, we should talk about, just kind of do a quick plot overview and the production and all of that, just to kind of set the stage. So like we mentioned a little bit before, Tom Perrotta has said that his main inspiration for the book was the 92 presidential election with Bush, Clinton, and third-party candidate Tammy Metzger, a.k.a. Ross Perot. But he also has a secondary inspiration. I actually read the little New York Times article about the other thing he brings up in relationship to this, which was an incident in 1982 at a high school in Eau Claire, Wisconsin, in which a pregnant student was elected homecoming queen, but the staff changed the results, announced a different winner, and then burned the ballots to cover it up, which is a very movie thing to do. It's like really like you didn't need to burn them. That's really intense. I mean,
who knows? Because maybe
it didn't work.
I guess that's a good point. That's a really good point.
It didn't work.
More effort than Mr. M just throwing it in the trash can.
Yeah. Well, and in the case of the pregnant girl and the homecoming queen, there apparently the disparity in votes was much greater. She won. It was like 100 votes to 70 or something. Wow. Like she really won.
Yeah,
it wasn't like a 1 vote difference
by the person who, if he'd only voted for himself, despite his moral, or in the face of his moral goodness, unquestioning moral goodness.
Yeah. There was a line in the New York Times article that I thought was really 1992 of it all. In the article, it says, Miss Schultz, who is the student, had dyed deep red hair, very tie, and wears mismatched clothing and black eyeshadow. She said she wanted to, quote, show that someone different could be homecoming queen.
I love her.
And she won by 30 votes.
I wonder how she's
And they tried to take it from her.
I wonder how she's doing now.
I know.
I do like that Parada makes nothing is cut and dry in this movie, really. I mean, other than for me, the statutory rape of a young student. But it is like, well, it was only 1 vote, and it is a vote that really, if what's his face were, But I also read in Daniel Joyo's review of the movie 25 years later, so April of 2024, on RogerEbert.com. 25 years later, Alexander Payne's election remains as relevant as ever. And he writes, a third source of inspiration might be the most instructive one for the film's enduring relevance. Parada, had been teaching at Harvard and Yale. He noticed the young women in his classes were far different from those he grew up with because, unlike his contemporaries, these women were raised by feminist mothers. And he quotes Parada in Brian Raftery's book, Best Movie Year Ever. These women were going to conquer the world, and I could see they made people uncomfortable. And so Tracy Flick is like, he upped that discomfort and then created Jim McAllister as the, Joyo says, perfect vessel of mediocrity to receive it.
Absolutely. I think this is a good time to talk about the cast a little bit, because I think Matthew Broderick in that role is doing something very specific that other actors might not have fulfilled.
Yeah.
Like alternate casting for that role. Like apparently it was offered to Tom Cruise and Tom Hanks. I don't know how that can be true. I don't know. But it says there's an interview with Alexander Payne where he says, it was my first studio film and Paramount put me through a number of casting hurdles. Meet this guy, meet that guy, offer it to Tom Cruise, offer it to Tom Hanks, all these things which are a big time waster as far as I'm concerned. But one actor we could all agree on ultimately was Matthew Broderick.
It's just such a different movie between the three of them. Like Hanks is so wholesome that it would be like grotesque for me in a different kind of way.
Yeah, exactly.
And like Tom Cruise makes me uncomfortable in general, so I don't even know that. But I know that Alexander Payne has famously said he had never seen Ferris Bueller when he cast Matthew Broderick in this role. But it is impossible to watch Broderick in a high school and not
and hear his voiceover. Yeah. It's so specific.
And especially the shower scenes compared to his like charming singing in the shower as a kid versus the two, which do such different things in this movie. It's
he's at a point in his like aging in his life where he's just flipped in some ways from this precocious kid, young adult to a slightly older man. And I think it's funny to have Ferris Bueller as a reference for him, because all of the things that we forgive Ferris Bueller for in that movie, which again, I haven't seen in a while, but I've seen 1,000 times.
So much.
Yeah, it's a fantastic movie. It was one of my favorites growing up. But he is precocious and hard-headed and all the things that Tracy Flick is.
Except
he's a boy.
He's a boy and he doesn't care about school. Like,
right.
Tracy would hate him. Watching him get away with everything and then also not care about his, like, place. It's really fascinating to think about the two of those juxtaposed.
Yeah. But also, if you decide in your mind palace that Mr. McAllister is actually grown-up Ferris Bueller, you get even more insight into the, like, feeling of being wronged.
Yeah.
You know, by the world. Like, I had the ability to do whatever the fuck I wanted and nobody cared. And I got away with everything and, you know. Well, and now I'm this sad high school teacher who, like, you know, has to watch other people succeed. I think he's perfect for this because we come in with such a predisposition to him. A lot of people have talked about, I know you didn't watch The Pit, right?
No.
But Noah Wiley, who is the main doctor in that, it's like a shorthand, you know? Like, he comes in with all of our trust already from ER. If The Pit came in and decided that Dr. Robbie was going to be a bad guy, it would, like, really flip our expectations.
That's sort of the trick of this, and I wonder if that's part of why it takes a minute to realize. Because you come in, you see Matthew Broderick, and you're rooting for him, and when he's, like, first talking about his position in the school and how much he loves teaching and all, you sort of want to believe him, and especially because we didn't really know Reese that well yet.
Yeah. And, like, so let's talk about that because Reese Witherspoon came in having done Man in the Moon, Fear, and Pleasantville. And then Cruel Intentions had just come out a month prior to this.
Well, and she really plays the, like, good girl in that movie. So.
Yeah. And so we had seen her in other things.
And in Fear too, actually. She gets caught up with the bad guy, but, like, this is the first movie where she really gets to have some bite. Yeah.
Yeah. This is the first time that she's given anything for us to kind of bump up against in terms of, you know, whether we like her as a protagonist or not. And also, we hate women.
Right. It's so important to remember.
Yeah. Never forget. Never forget that America hates women. Oh, quick note on Reese Witherspoon. She actually also was interested in the role of Tammy. Basically from the speech that she gives at the assembly, because I think she probably thought it would be really fun to give, which I'm sure it was. There's the famous story of Chris Klein being discovered for this movie. He was a student at the high school there when they were casting at Millard West High School in Omaha, and he was a drama student. And Alexander Payne, like, saw him for it there, and he had, like, been doing high school plays and community theater. And so I just have to point out, because I'm a big fan of teachers, as are you, I think. And I just love stories like this. The principal of his high school was Dr. Rick Kalowski, and was a huge proponent of arts education.
Hell yeah.
And so there were lots of, like, acting and programs at the school. The high school was being scouted as a location for election, and the principal made sure that he introduced him to Chris Klein.
That's very sweet.
Yeah. And so he ended up getting the part in the movie when the next year, he was a drama student at Texas Christian University. He was only a month into his first semester, and then he got the role to play this part in Election.
And he's so
I just
good.
love stories like that.
That's so sweet. And he's so good and so pure. And I think part of that too, maybe why that feels believable in this movie, is because he's so fresh, you know?
Yeah. And it's funny though, because the Jessica Campbell who plays his sister was also one of those local discoveries.
Did you read? I feel like we have to mention, sadly, she passed pretty young.
I didn't read that, actually.
She had like, and it's an odd one where she had flu-like symptoms for a couple of days, and then...
Oh, yeah, she died. Well, she died in 2020.
Yeah, she was only 38, so...
Yeah, I recognized her from, she had guest role on Freaks and Geeks. But December 2020.
Yeah, so they haven't said anything, and flu-like symptoms could mean a lot of things, but it's hard to look at that. I don't want to speculate, but...
No, of course, but...
hard not to when you read that. But yeah, it's sad. Yeah. She's so great in this movie.
She is. She didn't stay around in acting forever. She actually became a naturopath, which is interesting. But I loved her in this movie. We'll talk about her in detail later, but the character of Tammy, this time around, watching in the context of everything else we've watched recently, was really an interesting one to think about. We'll save her for sure, but I was thinking the same thing. Anyone else in the cast we feel like we want to kind of highlight here?
Holmes Osborne, who I love. He plays Tammy's dad, but he's my favorite dad in everything. He's in Donnie Darko. He's in That Thing You Do. He's just, I just think he's so charming. I want him to be my dad. He's in an episode of X-Files, and so I've loved him for a long time. He's great, but not in any way that like is relevant to any conversations we're having other than the fact that he is in this movie.
Yeah. Well, and Mark Herelick, who plays the disgraced teacher. I recognized him from a bunch of other things too, but I couldn't remember from what. But he's still acting everywhere. He was in an episode of How to Get Away with Murder, which I'm thinking is probably where I saw him, because I watched that. He's been in The Morning Show, Presumed Innocent. He's still working. But man, he does a really good job of playing a really sort of despicable, unsympathetic character that is trying to portray himself as the victim when he's clearly not.
Yeah, he's so pathetic. Yeah. And so, I don't know what the word is, but watching Jim, like, not defend him, right? Like, it's not that. And like when Mr. Novotny is like telling him and he's like, I didn't want to hear that. He's not like, you shouldn't have sex with a teenager because it's wrong to have sex with a teenager. He's like, you're going to get in trouble. And like it. And
he eventually mentions it's illegal.
Yeah. And I think it's hard to say, okay, everybody in this movie has huge issues with sex. Like that's number one. That's the number one thing that kind of drives most of what sex and relationships, I should say, maybe, and intimacy, maybe. But like, it's hard to say if it plants the seed in Jim's head to have some sort of like, I don't think it's an attraction to Tracy, but there is some sort of like psychosexual thing going on with how he feels about her. And I don't know if his issue with Novotny is that it plants that in his head, or it's that like Novotny is doing the thing that Jim has thought about. Yeah,
I think it's more the second. It's funny, watching the movie this time, I really felt like Alexander Payne, when making this movie, maybe knew we were going to think of Tracy Flick as the villain, but to me, it's so clear that the men in this movie are absolute idiots. And that they are deluded, and that they are like self-aggrandizing and turning themselves into victims. Like all of the voiceover that Matthew Broderick has is so clearly like wildly off base about his own existence.
Well, and it's funny thinking about the voiceover compared to Mean Girls and compared to Clueless. Where like Mean Girls, she's sort of just narrating what's happening, and it doesn't feel to me like she's doing any deceiving for herself or otherwise. Cher thinks that she's telling the truth. Cher believes the world she's seeing through her eyes is accurate. You know he's lying to
But I
himself.
think he thinks he's telling the truth.
And I think he thinks we believe him. I don't think he thinks that he, like, is... I think he's lying to himself to try to feel okay about the life he's living, and also thinks he's smart enough to trick us. Because that's why he just throws those votes away and doesn't try to hide them, because he thinks he's figured it out. You know what I mean? Like, and doesn't do...
Yeah. But I do think that the movie is telling us that these are very dumb, deluded, like, oblivious
but I don't think he thinks that he's happy with his life, or is this, like... Because he wouldn't then be trying to cheat on his wife. He wouldn't be throwing the election. He wouldn't be... It's
funny. I took it at face value that he believed what he was saying to himself.
That's interesting.
So, yeah. So there's actually 4 different voiceovers in this movie, which is a change from what we've been talking about. And apparently, I haven't read the book, but apparently in the book, there's like 16 different perspectives. Yeah. And that just would have been too much for this.
Yeah. That would be interesting. I don't know that any movie has done that, because it would be really hard, but it would be kind of fun to see how that would play out.
Well, and the structural challenge of even having 4 apparently is part of what attracted Payne to the movie. He was not really that interested in doing a high school movie because that was sort of what was going around at the time. But, you know, he read the script and he realized, or he read the manuscript and he realized that it wasn't a typical high school movie. And also he was interested in how to make that work with the 4 different voiceovers. A little bit more production stuff maybe that we can talk about, and then just kind of do a brief plot recap. A few other interesting production things. One, I mentioned when we first started that I had forgotten about all the different camera techniques. I love the way they're utilized in this. It's a little bit more absurdist than we tend to get these days. There's a lot of, like, you know, just a circular cutout of someone's head placed on someone else's head in the middle of some really awkward sex. Like, there's a lot of, like, you'd almost expect, like, a star wipe or something.
Yeah.
Like, there's a lot of really kind of cheesy transitions and things. But I think sneakily that helps you structurally kind of stay on track with all the different voiceovers. Kind of keeps things delineated in a way. One of my favorite things, though, about this film is the location stuff, for personal reasons. So this was filmed in and around Omaha, Nebraska, which is where Alexander Payne is famously from. He has a film called Nebraska. He's a very Nebraska guy. I had never been to Nebraska until 2023 when I spent about a month there, but one of my dear friends is from Nebraska. And when I brought this movie up to her, I knew she grew up right outside Omaha, and I knew that she was a fan of Payne, and I thought we had talked about this film before, but I didn't realize exactly how specifically close to home this was. So in the spirit of shouting out teachers on this podcast, which I think we should continue to do, I found out from my dear friend Heather that not only is this her high school that they filmed at, Papillion La Vista High School.
Papillion, I'll never get over it.
Papillion, I know, I love it. A lot of the exteriors were also filmed around the area that she grew up.
Cool.
And it looked interesting. There's a lot of scenes of, like, what's about to be big developments. And then I feel like I saw, like, the updated version when I was there. But the thing that's really great about this story is just, like, we love teachers, right? Heather's mom was a special ed teacher at Papillion La Vista High School. So while this was filmed after Heather graduated, her mother was there when this was filmed. And not only was she there, she was the sponsor for the Student Government Association.
So fun. I love
And
this.
Alexander Payne sat in on one of their meetings. Apparently, they asked if she wanted to play a small part in the film as, like, a librarian of sorts. And she decided that it was just going to be, the days would be too long. She didn't want to get up that early and spend all day on set.
Yeah, teachers work hard.
Exactly.
That's so funny.
So Yeah.
I love that story. I think it's so sweet and so fun. And it's also cool to kind of see that, because we know the janitor in the movie, Lauren something.
Yes.
Lauren Nelson, which is such a Nebraska name. I come from a family of Olsons from North Dakota.
There you go.
But was an actual janitor at the school, and his role is really pivotal. And so it's interesting.
And a lot of the background had, like, they filmed during the school year. There were a lot of students in it. They had originally tried to film in Omaha proper school system, and they had read the script and were like, absolutely not. You're not filming here.
So funny. Can't imagine why.
Yeah, exactly.
Every time I see a review, especially from the Time refer to this as a teen comedy, I'm like, this is a comedy in ways with teens, sure, but I don't know that this is a teen comedy.
No, I don't think so. But yeah, there was a lot of, I think the reason though it still feels like an actual high school is because of the filming locations. Also, like, I think Reese Witherspoon was in her early 20s at the time, and Alexander Payne had her actually go spend 2 weeks in Omaha at the high school, hanging out, pretending to be a transfer student.
It's never been kissed.
Yeah. She apparently was escorted around by a girl very much like her character. She says, president of the student council, a captain of the volleyball team, and head cheerleader, a total overachiever. She said, the experience helped me get back in the mindset of teenagers and empathize with their problems.
Amazing.
So I love that. I just, the fact that there's like actual like high school students running around in the background, you can kind of feel it.
I think so.
It just has that vibe. We should probably do a quick plot recap before we get into anything else about it. I mean, I feel like most of our listeners have probably seen it, but maybe like me hadn't seen it in like a million years. So we immediately meet our main character, Tracy Flick, who is the overachiever in question. She's running for president of student government.
We meet, just because I do think it matters, I think we meet McAllister first. It's all silent.
Yeah. We meet him getting ready for work.
His first, like, he gets the first word in the movie, too.
Right. That's true. Yeah. And we kind of get our initial face off of the two of them, right? He's getting ready for work. He's showering at work after working out. She's setting up her table to get her signatures for student council president. And he walks in, and you can immediately see the disdain on his face. And I had forgotten how obvious it is that he doesn't like her this entire time. But he just doesn't. Like we said, there's 4 different voiceovers. His is in the beginning talking a lot about his friend, the teacher, Mr. Novotny, who had a relationship, we're going to be clear, obviously this is statutory rape, but according to him, had an unfortunate relationship with a student and ended up kind of being fired and departing in shame. And this seems to have affected more his opinion of Tracy Flick than anything else. It's like somehow he seems to think that it tarnishes her as a person.
And it's her fault.
Yeah, exactly.
His friend got sent away, and
and
then all of it, there's such a domino effect throughout the movie, because then Novotny's wife is now on her own, and McAllister and his wife are become closer with her, and he's deluded about that relationship as well, and so that is somehow Tracy's fault. And
everything is her fault. He tries to start an affair with his friend's ex-wife, which they have one encounter, which she immediately regrets, and goes to tell his wife.
And before she goes to her almost immediately, and in that short amount of time, he has decided the two of them are
in love.
Yeah.
He calls her like 27 times, which
so pathetic.
Oh my God. It's also like, this movie doesn't traffic at all in like the violence side of things. It's just the sexual harassment. But that obsessive calling really made me uncomfortable. Yeah. It made me really think of some ways that can get much more unpleasant.
Well, and it's the kind of, what's the word that I want? The word isn't harmless because it is harmful, but it's the like on the surface, just like I just said, he's pathetic, and he is. It is pathetic, but it is also harmful and troublesome and a problem. Even if all he does is call her incessantly, it's still like insisting on space and
ownership.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And it's the kind of thing that we romanticized a lot in these movies at the time of like, don't take no for an answer. And it's like, no, actually please do.
Take no for an answer.
Yes.
For sure.
But so Mr. McAllister decides that Tracy Flick needs an opponent, and he convinces the football star who has had an injury and can't play anymore that he should run, even though the football star doesn't seem to have any aspirations towards politics or two brain cells to rub together.
But he's game for it. He's such a good sport. And I do get the impression that he does, once he's in, he does want to win. And I think he would try his best to do a good job. Right. And he would. But also if he didn't win, he would probably be like, okay, she'll do a good job too. Yeah. It's like, he's so harmless. Yeah. It's so important to Tracy keeps saying it's her destiny. And the reason it's her destiny is kind of because it's her destiny. But she is also the most qualified and the one who wants it. The only one who really wants it. Exactly.
We get a third-party candidate popping in because Paul's sister, Tammy, is, even though she doesn't admit she's gay, all the people she's attracted to are girls, which is such a good line.
Oh, it's so good.
I'm not gay. I'm just, all the people I'm attracted to happen to be girls.
Open. Who knows? Yeah. Maybe she'll fall in love with a different gender. We don't know. So far, though.
Yeah, so far her track record's pretty solid. But kind of similar actually to other conversations we've had about teenage queer feelings. The girl that she is in this quote unquote relationship with seems to be more focused on it as an experiment and doesn't want it to be taken seriously and very much doesn't want anyone to know. The character, Lisa, that Tammy has been dating, breaks up with her. We get this really funny montage of Tammy mooning over this girl and remembering them on the swings together and all of that, which is quite hilarious and actually is weirdly equalizing because you feel like that's probably how this movie would treat any breakup, whether it is same sex or otherwise. But then Lisa decides to date her brother. So she dates Paul and helps with his campaign. And as a result, Tammy freaks out and for revenge decides to jump into the race.
And again, it never occurs to Paul that any of this is happening. He's just so clueless.
So oblivious, doesn't understand why she's doing this.
And he is really sweet to Tammy whenever they interact. And
yeah, there's a whole scene where he says I hope that we're always going to be okay after this, and does this nice speech. Also mentions briefly that she's adopted, which I was like, is that a joke? Because it's never mentioned before or after.
It makes me laugh out loud every time because it's so offhand and it's not really necessary, but it is helpful information and he does mean it. So it's another level of him being, because the older brother in a movie like this is so often a minor villain and would be holding that over his little sister's head and treat that as use that as a reason to be unkind. But no.
Yeah. No. And I actually, for a moment, was like, is that a joke? Is he digging at her and being like, just because you're adopted? But then I was like, no, he wouldn't do that. She actually is adopted.
Yeah, and that's how we find out.
Just happens to mention it. Yep. Yeah. But there's an inciting incident where Tracy kind of freaks out and pulls down all the posters in the hallway, and then Tammy takes the blame.
Well, it's funny because I was so obsessed with trying to see her as a villain this time because it was so much harder for me to at my old age that I was like, that's the first and almost only time she does anything actually wrong. And it is in reaction. It's it's like an emotional regulation issue because she damages her own poster, and she's been working so hard, and she knows nobody else is taking it seriously, and she acts out and then has to deal with that. But it's like,
and it's not like she takes down only Paul's posters or whatever. She takes down every single poster.
Yeah. And so again, not okay, but compared to everything else happening in this movie, it's such a, to me,
but also not like she's not throwing the election or rigging the election.
Right, that's what
she's
I mean.
Just taking down posters.
Yeah, it's like so minor. It's the worst.
People can still vote for whoever they want to vote for. Just because there's no poster
up
doesn't
they all
mean they've
know
stopped existing.
Who's running.
Yeah,
like that's. But I think it's the worst thing she does in this movie, really, other than be annoying.
Yeah, absolutely, and raise her hand all the time.
Right.
Yeah. But Tammy confesses, and as a result, we'll talk more about Tammy, I promise. But the fact that the queer character in this movie actually gets like a happy ending.
Talk about a girl with ambition.
Yeah. She gets transferred to a Catholic school that is all girls that she has observed from a distance in the past.
Good for her.
Playing soccer. And she makes some new friends that she's smoking in the bathroom with. She meets a new girlfriend. Like, good for Tammy.
Yeah, I'm happy for Tammy.
Yeah. But then the election happens and Paul votes for Tracy because he feels weird voting for himself.
Such a doofus.
And this is where Mr. M realizes that it's one vote one way or the other and decides that Tracy shouldn't win. He throws out 2 votes.
I didn't watch any of the extra features that came with whichever release, maybe the 10-year anniversary release of the DVD, but I did read that Payne pointed to all of the like symbolism around trash in the movie. There are like dump trucks and dumpsters, and the first time we see that McAllister's impression of himself and what he wants people to see is at odds with who he really is when he's cleaning out the fridge and is acting like he's doing a good thing by cleaning up everybody else's messes, but he's making a bigger mess for the janitor who then
he throws someone's Chinese food on the
all
floor.
Over the floor and doesn't even see. And then also that Tracy tearing the posters down, leaving them, Tammy's able to use that to frame herself. And then also that the mess McAllister makes in the beginning is like, it is the janitor who finds those votes and has it out for him. So like, that's, and it's funny in the review I read of it where they're talking about that. They're like, Payne isn't able to tease out exactly what all of that means. He's just pointing to the fact that it is there.
That's so funny. Well, to me, it's like, it's just a warning, man. Don't fuck with people in service positions.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, as someone who, like you, has worked a number of shit service jobs, like, someone's got to clean that floor.
That's right.
You know? So, and to me, immediately in any movie, if someone is disregarding of someone in a position below them, especially a service position, I'm like, you're the villain. I don't care what else you do.
That's totally right.
Yeah. But so Jim gets caught. I also did like that. I liked that the election officials that were the students were like clearly really upset by this.
Yeah.
Like to the point where at first, until we see the janitor, I thought that they had gone and told on him and been like, no, wait, I don't think this is right. Because they were like, but about election integrity, sir.
Yeah.
Like, I liked that there was a voice of reason from within the student body as well, you know.
It's also, just as we're working through this little part here, there's something so, I don't know what to me, but there's something about the fact that like, Tracy is the most qualified. She had it in the bag until all of this personal stuff started because she was running unopposed. And then if Tammy hadn't framed herself, she would have won. Like, the school goes wild at her speech.
Or at the very least, it would not have been a 1-vote race.
Right.
She would have split the ticket.
Yeah, that's true.
And she would have split the votes and taken away just enough.
And so all of that is because when Tracy says it's her destiny, and we kind of laugh at that because what does that mean? But it it does sort of end up being her destiny. It's a real like kind of like butterfly effect thing going on here.
Definitely. Yeah. So should we talk about the ending?
Yes. Let's.
Because the ending, so the ending that we see in the film is, and I didn't know about the alternate ending until this watch, but in the film, Jim is fired and he gets divorced and moves to New York City to work at the Museum of Natural History, which sounds like a dream. But if you know anything about this type of job, it's extremely low paid and it's sort of a demotion in a lot of ways.
And this is where I'm like, there's no way he thinks the story he's telling us is the life he's really living. He's like, all this exciting stuff. And I think he says he's like part of the education team there. And it's like, I mean,
you're a docent.
Kinda. Like you are.
Yeah. Nothing wrong with that.
No, but that's exactly right. There isn't anything wrong with that. But he believes he deserves so much more, you know? And
yeah, and this is like probably too much inside baseball that doesn't matter, but like those jobs typically are stepping stones for young people that are interested in education, right? Not a place for someone who had a full-time teaching job.
Exactly. And then, so he gives us all of that. He's talking about his like New York apartment. We see that it's kind of a shithole, all of that.
Oh, by the way, $15.50 a month.
I know.
This is 1999. Not actually that far off. Because I was living in the city in 1999 in a 2-bedroom with no living room for, I think, $16.50 on the Upper East Side. So pretty accurate, actually. The voiceover is trying to convince us that it is a wonderful thing.
It's one of my favorite scenes in any movie ever. I love it so much. Just the way he can't. Is this maybe the first time where we hear him break the voiceover and not have control of the story we know he doesn't have control of the story he's telling because we see what's happening throughout the whole movie, but I think in voiceover he stays pretty controlled and has justifications for everything, and this is the first time I think where he really breaks.
Yeah, so he's in DC for a conference and he sees Tracy Flick with the Republican congressman from Nebraska. That's my biggest issue with Tracy Flick, is that she's working for a Republican congressman. But I think we're meant to feel like, kind of assumes that she's sleeping with him.
Oh, huh.
Because of the way that they're like close with each other physically.
That's interesting. I don't know that I'd thought that, because I don't know that this movie wants us to think that. It's funny. I would actually.
Well, we're seeing her through his eyes. And so for me, it was like, in my head, he immediately upon seeing her, not only is jealous, not only is like this bitch, but also is all the assumptions he had about her and the previous teacher are continuing.
Yeah, I'm sure that he thinks she's sleeping with him.
Yeah,
but,
I'm not saying we're supposed to think that.
But my hope for Tracy actually is that she's not that she. Yeah. Tracy can do whatever she wants, but I just don't like the idea that, and I don't think the movie would want us to think that like Tracy's success hinges on
absolutely something not. No, that's not what I'm saying.
Especially like as having that sexual violence as a child.
That's not what I'm saying at all. Yeah, no. I'm just saying that in his mind, one of the things that he's thinking in that moment is, oh, there she goes again.
For sure.
You know, not that they think that we are supposed to think that. But then he just, as she gets into that limo and drives away, just throws his drink at it like a fucking child.
And I suddenly realized I wasn't angry at her anymore. I just felt sorry for her. I mean, when I think about my new life and all the exciting things I'm doing, and then I think about what her life must be like, probably still getting up at 5 a.m. to pursue her pathetic little dreams, it just makes me sad. I mean, where is she really trying to get to anyway? And what is she doing in that limo? Who the fuck does she think she is?
It's such a good surprise outburst there that it just, I think it's such a funny button.
Apparently, that shot was the first and I think only time that he managed to hit the car with the drink. And he almost scampers off. Like, he runs off away through the park.
Even the run is also really good. I just think it's
really funny.
He's such a little, like, slimy child.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, he just kind of, like a little rat running across the park.
Yes, that's exactly right. Like a little rat. Yes.
It's so funny. So that is the ending that we all got. But there was a previous ending that was screened in some of the test screenings that was not very popular with audiences and ended up being kind of scrapped.
Well, and it was just their attempt to shoot how the book ends, which is they meet. She goes, so he's at the in the book, he ends up working at a car dealership in town. And
notably a Saturn dealership, which is like so specific.
It's so specific, and it matters now that Saturns don't exist. Like that he didn't realize it was even for a failing car. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, exactly.
Brand. And
I had a Saturn.
That's so funny. Well, you may have.
It was the $400 car I bought when I moved back to Rhode Island. It had 206,000 miles on it.
Incredible.
And bald tires. And I drove it to my teaching job for the first year I worked there, and would occasionally drive my coworker with me. And I think he was very afraid for his life in that car. Understandably so. It was like a roller skate.
That's
anyway,
incredible.
R.I.P. Saturn.
I love that. But yeah, at the end of the book, it's sort of, I totally get why it doesn't work. It's on the outset, and especially for the movie, it would appear much sweeter because Tracy decides she's going to go to the dealership. And in the book, she's very clear. I'd been thinking about it for a long time, but it took me a whole year to work up the nerve. About a week before graduation, I put on my red dress and drove my mother's beat up Nova. Very important. We haven't talked a ton about Tracy's position as a middle class. We did a little bit at the beginning of the episode.
We did a little, yeah.
But that she doesn't come from the same kind of privilege as Paul, for example.
Yeah.
Nova out to the Chevrolet dealership on West Plains Boulevard. The day was blue and balmy, the kind of weather, ready, blah, blah, blah. I don't really know what I was after. Revenge, I guess. Maybe an apology. Or maybe just the chance to look him in the eye without my mother present, to let him know I was an adult now. No longer the schoolgirl he'd humiliated and tried to endure. All I knew for sure was that Mr. M was one of those loose ends I needed to tie up before leaving Wynwood for Georgetown. And then she goes, and the two of them kind of like, there are a few chapters in between that and they kind of toss the POV back and forth. But it ends in Mr. M's POV, and she asks him to sign her yearbook.
Right.
And they're nice to each other at the end in a way that, like, so he starts to write, I had no idea where to start or how to finish. It seemed to me then that I could cover every page of the yearbook with paragraph after paragraph of explanation and apology and still not be any closer to saying the things that needed to be said. And the Mr. M we see in the movie is
not capable of that.
And then she says to him, I'm scared. What if I'm not ready for college? Again, not something she would say to Mr. M. You'll be fine, I told her. You think so? Tracy, I said, you were ready for college 3 years ago. And then there's one last paragraph that's just about him starting to write.
Yeah, it's a reconciliation, which makes no sense with what we've seen in this movie.
Right, yeah. And I think the movie is just too biting and too sharp in a way that, like, Prada is, but he's also softer and more sympathetic toward his characters in general.
Yeah.
That's something that he's really good at and that you have more time and space for in a novel. So it just makes sense. And I think Payne's other movies too are similar in that they also kind of focus on characters who don't always make the best decisions, but like a movie like Sideways, or have you seen The Holdovers with Paul Giamatti?
Yeah.
That kind of end a little more soft, have like a little softer of an ending than this movie. So I understand why they were pushing for that, but it just wouldn't have worked.
Well, it kind of feels like, to me, if they had stuck with that ending, it would be almost like what we were talking about last week with Mean Girls, where like it felt kind of tacked on. We've got this very mean-spirited movie this whole time where everybody's a bit terrible, and then it's like, oh, we have this quick, easy resolution, done. And it's like, wait, what? So I understand why it didn't work. It feels like a very different tone. Mm-hmm. So, and I think the fact that it doesn't end that way and is a little bit more open-ended in some ways weirdly makes it more relevant for longer, because this is how our politics is now. The best way I've heard the ending decision framed is by Dana Stevens, who's the film critic for Slate, who's a part of the Culture podcast that I've listened to for like 15 years. I love her very much. She wrote a book about Buster Keaton, incredibly smart. She wrote the essay for Criterion for this movie. And so when she's talking about this ending, she says, the bitter yet wistful tone of the rewritten ending, which implies in a final coda that Mr. M hasn't met his last schoolgirl arch nemesis. So the girl in the museum group that is raising her hand, and you can see he has that look on his face again, has been crucial to securing election's lasting reputation as a story that about much more than a political dust-up at an Omaha area high school. Better to remember Mr. M this way, sprinting forever into the middle distance in an attempt to escape the consequences of his actions and the uncomfortable truths of his past, as Tracy and her powerful new mentor pull away into the uncertain future of the 21st century.
Beautiful.
I just love the way that that's framed in that quote.
Mm-hmm. And you also I don't want to feel like Mr. M has learned anything at the end of this movie.
Well, especially when it's not earned in the rest of the movie.
Exactly.
There's no place for him to have learned it. Mm-hmm. A fun little anecdote, though, about that alternate ending. It was never packaged as a DVD extra, and according to the article that I read, the only reason that we're able to view it is because a VHS tape with an early cut of the film was found at a local flea market. This is my favorite thing ever.
I love stuff like that.
The person reveals that they bought a box of old VHS tapes at the farmer's market in Wilmington, Delaware, for $5 on Mother's Day, without knowing that the working print was in the box.
Perfect. How did that end up there?
It's so funny.
I'd love to know.
Yeah.
Incredible.
There's like this twin thing of like the influence of this movie and then its resonance in the world since that I think kind of can't be overstated. Apparently people come up to Hillary Clinton still and mention Tracy Flick.
Yeah.
Which is rough.
It reminds me of the SNL when Tina and Amy are playing Hillary and Sarah Palin, and Sarah says something about like wanting the job or whatever, and you see Amy's Hillary be like, oh, that's the problem, I just didn't want it enough. And like that there's an interview with the Vox Culture writer Constance Grady.
I read that one
for NPR.
Yep. It's really good.
And what specifically, I mean, it's great top to bottom, but thinking of the pair of Hillary and Clinton, Grady says, I think one of the reasons that Hillary Clinton and Tracy Flick work so well as a pair is Tracy really demonstrates how much people don't like it when women are actively ambitious. And that is an issue that Hillary faced again and again. And this is the thing that is so true and spot on. Whenever she was not actively running for office, she was actually extremely popular. I think people forget that. It's not that people didn't like Hillary Clinton before she ran for president.
Yeah.
Like, in general, people loved her.
Yeah.
So people might remember when she was Obama's Secretary of State, there was that meme text from Hillary. People really love that picture of her wearing her sunglasses. She was an extraordinarily popular figure up until she said, okay, now I'm going to run for president. And then her approval ratings dropped dramatically.
She's Lisa Simpson.
Exactly. She said, people find it so off-putting and annoying and almost monstrous when a girl or a woman says, I think I'm qualified for this position of power. I'm going to go after it.
Yeah. No, this article is the one that I got my thesis statement from. We were the problem, not the movie.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
She also in that article talks about how right now, because that's a pretty recent article, like last year, couple years, about how right now we're looking back at these things and recontextualizing.
September. Yeah.
Yeah, like the Jessica Simpson book and the way we're looking at Britney Spears now. Like we've talked about Lindsay Lohan last week. Like this is the time of like the pop girls being shamed for, existing and wearing clothing.
Right. And the way that women can't catch a break no matter what they do. It's nothing new. And like...
Well, and in the book, she's more of a, like, almost like a Lolita type. They made her very cleaned up in this film. I think it's so smart. She's like way more aware of her sexual, like... currency or whatever. In the book. And in the movie, there are a couple of moments where she
seems aware, like when she and Jim are going back and forth, and he says like basically like, you should be lucky nobody finds out, and it's like, ew, fuck you.
Yeah, yep.
But then she says like, well, she's basically like, well, what's his face got all mushy and brought feelings into it, and I think that's her reframing the story for herself.
Yeah,
I think at the time as a young person she did believe.
Well, and like a lot of young girls that have been groomed and coerced into relationships like that believe that they had agency in it.
Right, exactly. And kind of needs that for herself.
Yeah. There was actually an interesting storyline on one of the crap shows that I watch regularly, one of the Chicago shows, the like Chicago Med, Chicago Fire, Chicago PD. They're just dumb brain candy. But there was actually a storyline on there recently about a young male TV star who was coerced and groomed into a relationship with an adult female, like co-star. And it was like, it was handled really well for one of those like CBS. So, but it's typical for people in those relationships to have a very different narrative for themselves for a very long time about what happened.
The thing that sort of still bums me out is reading how, like, this is an article in the Hollywood Reporter from April of last year by Kevin Dolik. Reese Witherspoon reflects on 25 years since Tracy Flick. I will say there have been so many articles that have been like, here's how we were wrong about Tracy Flick, why Tracy Flick isn't the villain we thought she was. But these conversations still come up. The way this person... Tracy Flick, the terrifying antagonist in Alexander Payne's sharp political satire, a cunning, ambitious, and oh-so-annoying foil to her teacher and would-be mentor.
Oh, Jesus.
Tracy Flick is at times the worst. For example, when her affair with Mr. McAllister's best friend is discovered, the teenager has no qualms about abandoning him entirely.
Oh, my God.
And in other moments, it's crazy.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Wow.
So I just think the fact that, again, April 2024, there are still
Jesus
watching this movie and seeing, and that's what they're seeing in it.
And so I think, one of the things that's often debated and that we've already talked about a little bit is like how much of this blame for Tracy is in the text and how much of it is what we read in it. And so in relationship to what you just read, that same article in Vox, Constance Grady says the idea that Tracy carries as much responsibility for her relationship with her teacher as Clinton did for his adultery with Flowers, and that this relationship should be a source of shame for her, is embedded in the text. That's the idea. But it would also be contradicted by the second forgotten plotline of the book of Parada's election. Because in Mr. M's class, they talk about not just the election, but a local news story that's like a rape, where the students, the male students side with, actually all of his students tend to side with the boys in that story.
I think except for Paul.
Well, so what I read was that in the book, Mr. M is the one person that has like a self-righteous, like, he disagrees.
It's in the first chapter. Do you know what story they're talking about?
I do.
I think we've talked about it on this podcast for some reason. I have a memory of that. But it is talking about a real case that people are maybe familiar with. But at the end of the chapter, I think this is what sort of pins Paul in his head as being so pure. Lisa got my point. Her face tightened with dismay. I was pleased to see Paul Warren's hand shoot up. Those Glenridge guys are scum, he declared, silencing the room with the force of his judgment. That girl didn't deserve what they did to her.
Yeah.
If I had to stick a pin in the map of the past and say, that's where it all started, I guess I'd choose that moment.
Right. And so the way that this is framed in that article is, while Mr. M doesn't want to admit it, the football player rape case and Dave's seduction of Tracy are analogous, both sexual abuses of power. Tracy is a child and her teacher takes advantage of her, and Mr. M blames Tracy for it. So it's pointing out the hypocrisy of him, not siding with the football players and being surprised his students do and ashamed of them for it. And then also having this reaction to this other girl who's taken advantage of.
Unsurprising that the case that is theoretical for him, even though it's a very real case, but it's one that doesn't directly affect him.
Yeah.
He can be a human about. But the second something is a little inconvenient for him or makes him question his own sort of
and it really, to me, also speaks to the idea that, like, for a sexual crime to be denounced, it has to be the worst version of that crime.
Right.
It has to be, there are no, what was she wearing, this and that, like, was she asking for it, all of those stupid questions. Like, he can introduce all of those ideas with Tracy because she has some power of her own, he sees, that he thinks she has. Versus this case, which was horrific, and there's no... It's like, if you want the worst case scenario for this type of thing, this was basically it.
Right. It's also gross in a lesser way, but still gross, that it's that moment of goodness in Paul where he pins him as a mark. Like, and he's like, he can be the pawn I use to get to Tracy Flick.
My relationship to that specific case is that I grew up in Glen Rock, and everyone confuses Glen Rock and Glen Ridge. Mm-hmm. And I, for my entire life, have been really offended by that comparison, primarily because of this case.
Yeah, fair. Absolutely fair.
Yeah. 1989. I remember this when it happened.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, how could you not? I mean...
Yeah.
Just because we always do. It's a movie where not a whole lot going on with the soundtrack, like in a pop culture way. I think it's the way it uses the music in the movie. I gave Mean Girls shit for, but I think it's because it wasn't thoughtful about its music. And I think this movie is. There's just nothing that I'm excited to, like, there's no, like, cool cover or like.
No, but what there is work from Ennio Morricone, who was an Italian composer that did more than 400 scores for cinema and television. And, like, it uses all of the, like, I even put it in my notes, like, this sounds like a weird, like, effect from a Western, because it was
specifically spaghetti
Westerns
stuff,
yeah. So all of those, like, underlying music cues aren't current pop culture. They're references to, like, historic movies.
Right. Yeah, it's really fun and weird.
Yeah.
And similar in a way to what we were talking about with the visual effects in the movie of these, like, weird sort of feeling kind of like anachronistic in a way. And
I mean, Alexander Payne apparently didn't want really any modern music in the film. He wanted to use mostly scoring. But because it was produced by MTV and Paramount, they wanted a lot of, like, current music in it. So it was, like, it wasn't his idea to have current rock music in the movie. And so that's probably why it doesn't feel like it makes sense.
Knowing that it's intentional. And of course it is, because everything about this movie is. Yeah. And not to keep dragging Mean Girls, but that's the difference, right?
We can't stop.
But that's the difference. And so, but I just, want to talk about that because we always do.
Yeah, so. He said, when talking about it, he said, I remember the fight I had to go through to have the opening credits have score, not a rock song. Mm-hmm. It was normal for movies to have some kind of rock song in the opening credits, and at end credits, I had to tell them I'm making a motion picture, not a jukebox.
Yeah. You know what else is interesting, too, about that? Is this movie, it's, in my head, I was like, oh, this movie could have been 1950.
Yeah.
Like, there's nothing in this movie that
pins it. Yes, absolutely.
It's really, and that kind of, we keep saying, like, how relevant and timeless it feels. Mm-hmm. And part of that is just because people continue to be terrible and continue to hate women. But it's also...
Yeah, that it's not pinned to pop culture of the moment. It wasn't a commercial success at the time, which I always forget because it's such a lasting film. It did get a lot of, like, nominations, Best Adapted Screenplay for an Academy Award, Golden Globe nomination for Reese Witherspoon for Best Actress. But it's had such a lasting impact. Roger Ebert actually gave it 3.5 out of 4 stars.
Which is pretty good for him.
Yeah. Yep.
He liked it. And I'm trying to remember, like, he mostly got it, I think.
I think he did,
right?
yeah. Yeah, he said, I remember students like Tracy Flick, the know-it-all who always had her hand in the air while the teacher desperately looks for someone else to call on. In fact, I was a student like Tracy Flick. A legend in his own mind, they wrote under my photo in the Urbana High School yearbook. I remember informing an English teacher that I didn't know why we were wasting time on the short stories of Eudora Welty when I could write better ones myself.
I can't believe he's admitting this.
I know.
That would die with me.
Yeah. Yeah. But, you know, I think what's unsaid there is the fact that he was a male student and it's looked at very differently.
Right. Well, and then, yeah, Tracy is smarter than that, would never occupy such an exposed position.
Right. Right. This movie also has been said by Alexander Payne anyway, that Obama told him this was his favorite political film.
Mm-hmm. Oh, we haven't talked about the most important thing in this entire movie.
Which is?
Matthew Broderick's bee sting.
Oh my God. Which isn't in the book.
It's so funny.
It's apparently with 4 different prosthetics that like grew over time.
It's gruesome.
It
and
is.
The fact that they don't cover it up, that he just walks around with that awful thing the whole time.
Yep.
I love how much he gets what's coming to him in so many ways, even if he doesn't
think he is, but he does.
Yeah, it's like man, I love that bee sting. It's so funny.
It is. And as someone who has an irrational fear of bees, I'm not allergic, but I'm terrified of them.
I've never been stung, and so I assume that I'm allergic.
Well, I think
and
that's
I'm also
what
terrified
it is.
of them.
Yeah, but that was rough to watch. Like on the eye. Good Lord.
It's so bad.
Yeah.
And again, I just think it's like another signpost that there's something like about his moral failings that make him, well, it's because he's creeping around in the yard too. So it is his moral failings that
absolutely. What is he doing in her backyard yelling her name?
It's like a lot of this movie is weirdly Shakespearean to me in that way. Like that's such a
I just like how it inverts a lot of these common tropes, regardless of where they're from. Like the idea that, you know, you think of Lloyd Dobler holding the boob box over his head. Yes. And like, that's a romantic gesture in our minds from that movie. He's outside her house yelling her name. And we're just like, creep, go the fuck away.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. There was a sequel novel in 2022 called Tracy Flick Can't Win. Theoretically, it was being developed for Paramount Plus, but I don't think it's gone anywhere.
It seems like it's still sort of in conversation. I read 2 different versions where it was like, one is that Payne doesn't want to do it. Payne wanted to do one that is more of like a spiritual sequel that sort of takes what he likes about the book. But did you read in the book? She gets pregnant again, to go back to the Tracy being punished for having sex of it all, gets pregnant and is sort of like languishing in town and decides to run for school principal. And so to me, I don't know.
She's teaching at a school much like the one she went to. It's like, instead of us getting to imagine that she goes on to this political future where she turns into like, you know, maybe a more I almost said more successful version of Hillary Clinton. The only way that Hillary Clinton could be more successful is if she'd won the presidency.
Such a good
She
point.
was Secretary of fucking State. But you know what I mean?
I know what you mean.
Like a Hillary Clinton that didn't end up in the way that this Hillary Clinton did. Right. But like you get to imagine, if you are looking at this movie in the way we are, that she will work hard and get somewhere, and then the sequel disproves that idea.
Right. But to be fair, like for every school, like student body president who got straight A's and worked her ass off, how many of them make it to Capitol Hill? Like,
right. Absolutely.
So Parada is not interested in telling any stories that don't feel real to him, for sure. And I think that my guess is when he thinks about Tracy, this is...
Well, and that also goes back to the class thing, because like one thing that can make it very hard for you to succeed in spaces like that is if you don't have like financial stability already going into it. Because in the sequel, I think her mom is also ill. And that's one of the reasons she goes home.
The class thing is so important because she really thinks that all she has to do is get out of this school and she'll be... And we get a little hint of that with her in that conversation with the congressman, but we're doing a lot of what McAllister is. We don't know.
Right, we're making tons of assumptions.
In that conversation. And
absolutely.
she doesn't have anything except her good grades to help her.
Yeah.
And ambition, which...
Right, but sometimes the societal structures make that not enough.
Right.
So, in addition to the obvious comparisons to Hillary Clinton, there's a lot of pop culture since that has had sort of an election vibe to it. If you think about Leslie Knope in particular is the one that and we love Leslie Knope. That's the thing. Mm-hmm. I don't know what the difference is. I think maybe that she's a little bit goofier.
And we don't see her through a man's eyes.
That's right. Exactly. Yeah. I love Leslie Knope.
But Leslie Knope is so hand up in the air.
Absolutely. 100%. Apparently, Ryan Murphy has talked about how the first season of Glee was very influenced by election as well.
If it had stayed that way, I wonder how I would have felt about Glee.
Yeah. I liked it in the beginning. I'm not a person, though, who is necessarily attracted to spontaneous singing in the middle of my TV show.
You're not a musicals person?
I wish I was. I feel like it's a flaw in my personality that I just can't be happy like that. It feels like people that are that way are just so... They just experience a different kind of joy than I do. It's definitely my fault. The one thing we haven't really talked about that I feel like we should touch on briefly before we go is Tammy a little bit. I kept saying we were going to talk about her. This is such a unique gay character for the time.
Yeah.
It's 1999. We've talked about Christian. We've talked about the way in Clueless. We've talked about the way queerness was treated last week in Mean Girls. I brought up last week the tragic gay character in Pump Up the Volume, among many others. This is, for a 1999 movie created by just a white guy from Nebraska, Tammy is not punished at all for being queer.
Yeah, no.
I kind of love it. She gets what she needs in the end, which is to go to school with a bunch of other girls that want to smoke in the bathroom and date each other.
Yeah, and the student body loves her speech. She's one of the only honest people in this movie.
Yeah.
When she says I don't want to be president, I promise I won't do anything. She's not.
Yeah, she's kind of a nihilist. She rides around on her bike and hangs out at the power station.
She's the only one I want to be.
Yeah.
Friends with.
No, she's a great character. It's really surprising considering everything else that's going on at the time in queer representation. However,
speaking of
transition,
queer representation at the time.
Transition.
Yeah, nailed it.
Oh, I'm a professional. Next week, we are doing a movie from about the same time, released at the Toronto Film Festival in 99, but then released in the US in 2000. A very different version of Queer Teenagers because they were created by a very different type of filmmaker. We are watching But I'm a Cheerleader.
I think a movie both of us watched a little later in life.
Yeah, I did not see this at the time. I did not know this movie existed until probably my 30s, maybe. So oh God, I don't want to talk about how old I am again. But much later in my life than it would have had its ideal impact on me.
I saw this, I was probably a late teenager, early 20s, but just thinking about who I would have been if I had seen this in 2000, I was 14 years old.
Yeah.
How formative this would have been.
Because it's not just about sexuality either. There's gender nonconformity in it. It's a really special movie, honestly. I'm excited to watch it and talk about it. I think one of the reasons we didn't before is just because it's not directly referenced in Yellow Jackets,
but how?
I don't know how. We have created a little side list. It's quite short, but we have a little side list in addition to our Yellow Jackets referenced movie list of movies that should have been on the first list. Mm-hmm. And this is like number 1 on that list. Fucking Melanie Linsky is in it.
Right.
Natasha Lyonne, Clea Duvall, like, we have to.
Yeah. I mean, further down the list, Michelle Williams, Julie Delpy, smaller parts, but still, like...
RuPaul?
How we could have
fucking RuPaul is in it. How did we not start with that?
It's so wild.
Yeah.
It makes no sense. So I'm so excited.
Me too. I love this movie. We get another reference to Flag in this movie. Oh, it's great. So yeah, that's going to be next week. I would love to hear from our listeners if they have a relationship with this movie when they discovered it.
Yes.
Because I feel like we talked about with Chasing Amy, like my only queer references in movies were mostly in straight movies where it was either implied or it was tragic or something like that. I just wasn't cool enough to be aware of this. I didn't have any queer friends. I didn't have the like cool insider knowledge.
Is when I found this movie, is when I got my little group where everybody,
It's, if you don't know those people, which I love my friends from the time, they're just missing that one little piece of demographic information. So yeah, I would love to hear from our listeners if and when they watch this film. Also, if there are other films that they discovered later in life that either they wish they'd seen when they were younger, or like last week with Mean Girls, maybe didn't measure up to what they expected.
Right? Yeah. That's funny that you say that. We got an email from one of our listeners, Melissa M. We've got a couple of Melissas. This is from Melissa M. Who's just kind of checking in with my top 5 kid-centered movies. Remember we were talking about kid-led adventure movies?
Yes.
Labyrinth?
Yeah.
Adventures in Babysitting. Mm-hmm. Stand By Me.
Oh, God, I know.
The Goonies.
Hell yeah.
And The Sandlot. That is an impeccable top 5.
That's a really classic millennial, zennial cusp list, because a couple of them are a little after me and a couple of them are dead on. Like, Stand By Me, we've talked about, I don't know if we've talked about on mic, but how much that movie means to both of us. I think we have.
We're going to have, eventually, I mean, we'll do this podcast forever, so at some point we'll cover Stand By Me.
Yeah, I have to. I really have been kind of, since these conversations we've been having, have wanted to revisit that movie.
We should do that and Sandlot as a pair at some point. Sandlot is one that's a little after your time, is that right?
Yeah. I did watch it, but I think not like relating to it in the way that I would have if I was younger. Mm-hmm. Did you say we also have a new review?
We do, yeah.
That's nice. Is it good or bad?
Well, we're going to find out together.
Okay, cool.
It's from Zach Braff's Medicine Cabinet.
Oh my God.
It's really good.
That is fantastic.
I think we spoke at length about his Medicine Cabinet when we covered Garden State.
We did.
Just listen to the Dazed and Confused episode. I hope this is good. I'm reading it off the cuff. After rewatching this film for the first time in 20 years, I have some thoughts. I was born and raised in a small South Texas town. About an hour's drive from Austin, born in 76, graduated in 95. I can confirm that the high school culture felt true to my time in the early 90s, which is what we speculated that it felt like.
Yep.
There was no hazing, though. I only knew that it's something that happened to college frat boys. That's a good point.
Yeah.
Same in Jersey for me. But the accents. I'm fine if an actor can't do a Southern accent, but Adam Goldberg offends me with his aggressively New England accent. I don't know, maybe canonically Mike moved there from up north or something. Replace him with Travis from Yellow Jackets, and that would do a lot for the accuracy. Also, who is walking around with bongs in public? This is wild to me.
That's a really good point. I think that's one of the reasons that this film feels so out of time to me, that film. Because, like, in the 90s, we certainly weren't. But I can't imagine they were doing that in the 70s either. When would they be able to? Now they could.
Travis Birkenstock donates his bong to the Pismo Beach disaster relief fund, and he's got it just in a box.
Well, but maybe it's for tobacco.
That's a great point.
Because a lot of people were smoking tobacco out of bongs in the 90s.
Yeah. So thank
really
you,
funny.
Melissa, for that email, and Zach Braff's Medicine Cabinet for that review.
possibly the best username I've ever seen.
When we have 10 million downloads a month, I increase the number every time. Yeah, a month.
You just keep increasing the bar. Okay. Once we've taken over Joe Rogan's spot at the top of the charts.
Right, exactly. And we have merch. We'll start offering prize packs to people with the best Apple user review names.
Oh my God.
Because
that's so good.
Zach Braff's medicine cabinet is now the new reigning champ.
Definitely.
After I can't even.
Oh, wait.
Fifi Pastrami.
Fifi Pastrami. Yes. That's still up there for me.
Oh, they're both very
good.
So anyway, all that to say, send us an email, watcherspodnj@gmail.com.
Yes.
Send us a message on Instagram, watcherspodnj.
Yep.
I'm at AQ_Andrea_Q.
And I am at Jodie_Mim on Instagram, JODIE_MIM.
And we will see you next week at camp.
At camp.
Whoa.